Omari Ho-Song. Thank you so much for joining me on Louisiana Lefty.
Thank you, Linda Woolard. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm excited to have you on. It's a real honor, really. And you're here with Black Voters Matter, as we can see on your screen, which is a national organization, but you're here in Louisiana. And
yes.
we just had our midterm elections. Ballots are still being counted in key states, but can I ask your thoughts on the national results so far?
Well, everyone is talking about the red wave, right? And how in many ways it was more of like a little ripple, and really trying to analyze like what stopped it, what kept it from being worse than it could have been. And I think a lot of times, especially as of late, a lot of people are looking towards people of color and Black voters and Gen Zers, millennials, younger voters to really turn out in unique ways that they believe will help to put more progressive candidates in office. And so as that national conversation and analysis is happening, I think it's really important to, especially as Black voters in the state of Louisiana, a state that is clearly red. And I always do the quotations because I think we should also take those terminologies in terms of how we're labeling ourselves kind of with a grain of salt. But descriptively, so we are a red state. However, Black voters showed up, right? And so when we look at states like Wisconsin and waiting for results from Arizona, and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and then even Florida, where that Gen Zer is one of the first Gen Z Congress people in the United States Congress, right? And so I think we have to really begin
Maxwell
as a
Frost,
movement.
just to give him a little name shout out, Maxwell Frost.
Say his name. Thank you, Linda. So, folks like him who have really kind of defied the odds and help us to really look more towards our victories, because we know, especially as Southern voters, that things on a political landscape are crazy in many ways, in partisan ways, but also just on a societal level, community interactions, and is translating at the ballot. So, I really look forward to us defining what our wins look like and leaning more into that as we begin to build our muscle to gain those big victories.
I love the way you said that. And then you made the point that Louisiana is called a red state, but folks have often said we're not a red state, we're a non-voting state. Whew. It's one way to say it. Do you have any thoughts on our state elections? So, I mean, we're pretty entrenched still in some Republican seats, statewide at least. So do you have any thoughts on how that went?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the results were pretty, especially on the state, federal level, were pretty disappointing, but also expected. I think our power really is at the local level, right? Where these runoffs, many of these runoffs are happening. Much of the chatter and conversations, again, that we're having every day with each other really focus more on things that have local implications. And so while we have a lot of work to do on the US Senate level, I think that there was a victory in saying that a Black Democrat, 65, 67% of the vote was Kennedy, but there is a Black statewide candidate and another Democratic candidate that actually made some waves, right? And so we can build upon that and not really look at it as the loss, in terms of, okay, we got to deal with Senator Kennedy again and his nonsense, but we have two new people in the game who can really help us to change the political calculus of the state. And that's strong. And again, Black voters showed up, right? Turnout was low on election day, but we beat our early voting numbers in many of our parishes from 2018. So again, we got to redefine our victories in Louisiana. I could talk about Louisiana all day. So I don't know if you have specific questions.
Well, we'll talk about that.
I think overall, yeah.
We'll talk more on the podcast. I did want to ask you, and we'll talk more about this on the podcast too, but I have interacted with you a little bit online about Constitutional Amendment 7, and I did want to ask you about that while we're talking about our local elections. And thank you, by the way, for connecting me with the Decarcerate Louisiana folks, because we're looking at doing an interview with them so that we can deep dive a little more into this. So that's not on your plate to have to be the only voice speaking about it.
Well, good, because they did the work. They did the work. Yeah. Yeah.
So I did want to ask you about that. Folks were confused about this because there wasn't a unified voice
Yes.
pushing out what this meant. And I just wanted to get your general thoughts on that.
Well, so I think I've said this before in the last couple of days. I believe that what happened with Constitutional Amendment 7, which for those who maybe don't know all of the context, first moved through the legislature and passed unanimously as HB 298, and then became Act 246, I believe. It passed unanimously with 30 sponsors for it to then move to the ballot, right? And so this was something that we believe there was a political consensus that we want to get this. This is the language to remove slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime from our state constitution. Then it moves to the ballot and it becomes election season. And unfortunately, sponsor Edmund Jordan began encouraging folks to vote no because of unintended consequences. And so when I say that and I believe, again, there's some victories here, but in terms of just the basics, I believe that what happened with Constitutional Amendment 7 was, again, a 1-2 punch. The first punch is the confusing language. People were confused to begin with, right? Naturally, in 2022, most of us, especially Black voters and people of color and progressive white voters, we don't want slavery in the Constitution. We understood, right? But because there was kind of some confusion because there was still that subsection, except for the administration of criminal justice, that gave people pause.
Say that again, the subsection.
The subsection that said, except this rule applies, except in the case or in the lawful administration of criminal justice, right? So that subsection, which was actually a subsection in the legislation that passed through the legislature, that's what threw people off.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, why doesn't it just say prohibiting involuntary servitude, period? No subsection, no additional language, just period. And so that's what gave people pause. Now, that was the first punch, okay? These confusing constitutional amendments, we have to fix that. We have to fix it.
Yeah.
But the second punch, which was really, to me, the knockout, was Edmund Jordan's pivot, and then those of his colleagues, right, who released sample ballots. There were articles written, several articles written, right? There were conversations that were being had on social media and in person. Yeah. I personally attended the legislative Black Caucus meeting where I posed the question, what is the position on removing slavery from the ballot? And in that public forum, it was shared with us the unintended consequences, right? And that the sponsor, it's one thing when someone else may be speaking out, but the fact that the sponsor, who is also an attorney, speaks out and urges people to vote no. Of course, his colleague, like I can't really blame his colleagues, right? And then again, we can't really blame him. And this is why I say this. A lot of times when we're doing this systems change work,
right,
we're dealing with people who are making decisions that are hurting us. So it becomes easy to say you, them, those people they're what's bad about the system. It's the system that's bad about the system, right?
Okay.
And so instead of targeting the individuals, we need to look at the process, right? And so I think the victory is now we know, and I attribute this to Laramie Griffin, who hopefully you get to speak to with Decarcerate. He said, our victory is that now Louisiana voters know that slavery still lives in our Constitution. If they didn't know before, now they know.
Okay.
And to me, that's a victory.
And it's become a national news story that there was a wave of these amendments on ballots in other states. They all passed their amendments. We were the only one that didn't. So folks, there's a spotlight on Louisiana that some of the Louisianans don't really like that spotlight being on us because we don't want to be accused of keeping slavery in our Constitution. So folks have been pushing back on the national media, and I was like, but they're not wrong. This is correct. Slavery still exists in our Constitution. Their story is not incorrect. And I think for me, like you said, people really tried to vote the right way. People I know, people I talk to were wanting to vote the right way, and they feel bad on the back end of it, realizing, wait a minute, maybe I didn't have the right information on this. And so I don't know that it's a question for you, but the question is, how do we fix it so that we don't fall into these traps every time? I think one of the answers is make sure we're listening to the community groups who are involved in these things. I think y'all probably have the best answers for the average voter.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely, as Power Coalition for Equity and Justice often says, it's the people closest to the problem that are also closest to the solution. I think a lot of people, in terms of in the work space that I share, in this power building work, we know that we have to really prioritize and uplift the voice of those who are dealing with these issues day to day. But I think the season that we're in right now is accountability season, because we have to begin asking the tough questions, whether your person won or not, whether it's your representative or not. Begin asking the tough questions of, and in this particular instance, what are those unintended consequences, right? What were those? Why, when this was pushed through the legislature, did you agree to this amendment that became the subsection? Why was that agreed upon during the legislative process, but when it came to the ballot, there was a pivot? Help us to understand why we believe that keeping the language in there was better than dealing with the language. And how confident are we that it will meaningfully pass through the legislature in 2023? And the reason why I say that is because in 2021, the very same language that became the ballot initiative was killed in committee. So, these are some tough questions we have to answer.
So it's not a slam dunk that we get to vote on this again, is what you're saying.
In my opinion, as Omari Ho-Song, it's not a slam dunk. Just looking at what happened with 2021, and then additional information that may dissuade a Louisiana legislator from voting to remove this exception because of implications in terms of prison labor and pay, right? And will we, if we pass this, will we have to pay incarcerated people? Will we have to pay them a minimum wage versus an 86 cents?
Yeah.
Right. And so those things may come into play. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that what Representative Jordan and others have shared with us is that they believe that they can fix this in the legislature. I'm hopeful that that is something that becomes reality. I'm really hoping that is something that is reality. But if not, we have another fight, and that's to get this back on the ballot when we had an opportunity to remove it and then continue to deal with it in other ways.
Well, we'll talk more about this and all things Louisiana on the podcast. So sit tight. We'll get right to that.
Thank you.